Masked by M. Greenhill. Prologue. Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? San Francisco. No dead bodies, no stabbings, and no domestic disputes had marred his uneventful evening. Sure, there were a few bar fights he was called in to deal with, and his robbery at the 7-Eleven put a little variety into things, but so far his shift had been ordinary. Now, not so much. After overhearing yet another conversation between dispatchers, Officer Nigel Hardy threw his half-eaten donut into the gutter and groaned, "You have got to be kidding me, not tonight of all nights." Officer Hardy cursed under his breath as he climbed into his cruiser. Throughout the evening, a series of peculiar attacks had been reported in the Marina District, which had since been moved to the Financial District. The emergency operators were convinced somebody was running an elaborate prank, but the reports had his left eye twitching uncontrollably and his mouth forming a rigid grimace. A sure sign something was off. The police dispatcher who took the latest complaint debated aloud whether to call animal control, the circus, or the local mental institution to check for a missing patient. Some panic callers told 911 operators that a large, rabid dog was terrorizing the public. Others were adamant a dirty and ill-looking naked man was running around biting people. Further callers reported the dog and the man were together. Officer Hardy monitored the conversation across the police scanner with a growing sense of unease. He had no choice but to intervene. He reached for the two-way radio. "Dispatch, this is 233. I'm near the vicinity of the last sighting. We'll investigate. Over." The speakers crackled, followed by a series of blips. "Confirmed, 233. Mindful of what he could be walking into, he sped through the deserted streets with lights and sirens muted. Officer Nigel Hardy was a police officer bound to serve and protect the citizens of San Francisco, but his fellow officers and the public were unaware of his true allegiances. Officer Hardy was a werewolf, and his primary objective was to protect his own kind. He and other werewolves like him occupied strategic positions on the front lines of law enforcement departments across the country. They monitored werewolf activity across pack boundaries to ensure their existence remained a myth to humans. He had come from a long line of protectors, and he wasn't about to fail his race. Not on his watch. Within 5 minutes, Hardy arrived at the scene only to confirm his earlier suspicions had been correct. A petrified couple was huddled in a darkened doorway of a store. Less than 2 feet from the pair lurked a snarling wolf. Its eyes were wild and mean. Bared fangs drooled copious amounts of saliva, and what could only be blood dripped from its powerful jaws. The wolf's shoulders were hunched, and its head low to the ground as it prepared to attack. A growl ripped deep within its chest, and the guttural, raspy undertones raised the hairs on the back of Hardy's neck. He got out of the car and surveyed the area. Crap. Unlike the other witnesses that evening, Hardy understood the ramifications of the crisis playing out before him. He took a closer look at the creature. In their distraught state, the couple did not notice what his superior vision detected. The wolf looked unnatural. Tufts of dark brown fur had fallen off the animal's body and left its skin exposed. Instead of a smooth surface, the skin appeared scabrous and coarse, as if irritated and clawed at for hours. How the hell did it get like that? Hardy glanced at the couple. Despite his fear, the man had positioned himself as a shield between the canine and the woman. Just as the man held up his arm to protect his body from an imminent attack, the beast snapped its jaws at the couple. The man flinched and shrank further into the shadows. Instead of lunging, the creature howled, followed by a cry of pain and a series of whimpers. A distinctive creak, like timber as it strains and resists before it breaks, punctured the night air. The hairs on the back of Hardy's neck bristled. Double crap. The werewolf was beginning to transition to its human form. He needed to do something before this became a disaster of gigantic proportion. His eyes darted around the area and considered his limited options. Not seeing an alternative, he unholstered his SGI Sauer P226. The handgun was the only weapon he had with any chance of dealing with the other werewolf. "I'm going to fire my weapon to distract him. When I do, I want you both to run and don't look back. Understood?" In spite of their terrified state, both nodded profusely, their eyes fixated on the creature. He discharged the bullet in the air, and an ear-singing crack echoed through the deserted street. The sound shifted the animal's focus away from the couple. Now the wolf's massive, manging head faced him. The couple edged around the doorway and broke into a full sprint. When Hardy was sure they were out of earshot, he addressed the unstable werewolf in a quiet, even tone. "Friend, you need to calm down. You're in a heap of trouble. I can't overlook this. Not only have you exposed yourself to humans, but you've also bitten them. You're just lucky no one's died yet." He continued to assess the werewolf. An odd, putrid odor wafted from the creature. He had failed to notice it before, perhaps due to the intense fear that had radiated from the terrified couple. A cold, foreboding chill ran up and down Hardy's spine. His eyes remained glued to the slow and agonizing transformation of the unknown man-wolf. The change from one to another should not take this long, or be as haphazard. Hardy pulled out his phone and hit the first number on his favorite list while still watching the conversion. He did not need to wait long before the call was answered. "Alpha Locke, I have somewhat of a situation here that I'm going to need your help with." A deep, authoritative voice responded. "Situation?" Hardy briefed his Alpha on what had just occurred. This wasn't the first time he had been required to deal with the rogue wolf that had almost exposed them, and it won't be the last. His only consolation was that Alpha Daniel Locke would know what to do and would take the problem off his hands. Hardy stopped mid-sentence and stood transfixed. The werewolf had completed his painful change into a man. Now more pronounced, the rancid stench of rotting meat made his skin crawl. In all his 92 years, this was something he had never experienced. The man was covered from head to toe in black oozing pustules. There were patches on his scalp where hair used to be. A chunk of his right bicep was missing, as if bitten by ragged jaws. The hole in his upper arm was a mixture of gray and charcoal tissue. Hardy scratched the back of his neck. What he was seeing was not possible. "Hardy, you there? Report." Silence. The two werewolves stood immobile in the darkened pavement. Neither moved, not once breaking eye contact. A bulb from a nearby street lamp flickered and died, bathing the area in near darkness. The movement triggered a reaction in the injured werewolf. The last remnants of sanity left the werewolf's eyes, and a menacing growl from somewhere deep within its chest reverberated. Hardy's stomach plummeted. In an instant, Hardy dropped his phone and discharged his gun. He fired several shots in quick succession at the werewolf's heart. The body fell on the ground, dead before the bullet hit its mark. In the ensuing silence, Hardy heard Alpha Locke's deep voice booming from the phone on the pavement. "Hardy, what the hell is going on?" "Crap." Hardy removed his hat and scratched his head. "Paperwork on this one's gonna take me into next week." Officer Hardy approached the werewolf, still not sure what just happened. His chest tightened in horror as he gazed at the odd-shaped boils that covered the body. The sharp smell made him nauseous, and if possible, was stronger than before. How the hell am I gonna explain this? Chapter 1. Wildfire. Netherland, Colorado. Daniel Locke ended the call and threw his phone on the desk, where it slid into the back of his laptop with a distinctive thud. Throughout his conversation with Hardy, he had remained the stoic and commanding alpha everyone expected him to be. Inwardly, his rage bubbled just below the surface as Hardy described the condition of the downed werewolf. His people were dying in the worst way possible, and he had no idea how or why. Up until a month ago, werewolves did not get ill. Now bodies were piling up across the country, and he had no way of predicting when the next victim would appear and potentially expose them all. He hit the nearest wall with his fist and put a large hole through the surface. Wood splintered as the support beam cracked under the pure brute force. Simon poked his head through the door and eyed the damage. "Do we feel better now?" He glanced at his hand, which bore no marks to show it had made contact with anything, let alone destroyed a portion of the office wall, and shrugged. "Much." Simon leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm sure that poor defenseless wall had it coming." He chose to ignore his friend, who also happened to be one of his betas, and headed back to his mahogany desk. Simon, unable to hold his tongue in the best situations, inspected the damage and chuckled. "How the hell am I going to expense the fix? I'm pretty sure I don't have the GL code for in a fit of rage." He shook his head and turned toward Daniel. "I overheard some of the call. You know, it's okay if you don't have all the answers. This isn't your fault, and you can't save everyone." Daniel's green eyes flashed a warning at his beta. "I am not having this conversation." Simon's brows rose as he folded his arms. "Man, do you need to get laid?" "That's right, because if there's a problem, getting laid is always the answer." Simon pretended to think about it for 2 seconds before he winked. "Yup." Daniel rolled his eyes and snorted. "We all know that lately there's only been one thing on your mind." Simon put on his best offended face. "Nah, sex solves everything was my default position before I met Liza." He jerked a thumb towards the damage wall. "She finds very creative ways to calm me down before I get to that point." Daniel frowned and crossed his arms over his chest. He stood at his full height, towering over his beta. Well, we don't all have the luxury of having a mate, so I'll just have to take your word for it. In the meantime, we have somewhat of a problem on our hands. Simon's mood deflated as he shuffled his feet under the scrutiny of his alpha. As soon as the words were out of his mouth, Daniel regretted snapping at his friend. Simon only had his best interests at heart and only wanted him to find the same contentment he now experienced. But his friend's pity at not having a mate irked him. Moments like these, he regretted the ability to communicate telepathically with his most trusted advisors and was thankful it did not extend to the rest of his pack. I just think you gave up too soon, Simon said. He threw his friend a look that made it clear that this particular topic was off limits. He had long since grown weary of the politics that centered around this subject, and it did not help that his wolf echoed his friend's sentiment. Simon got the message and plopped down on the oversized brown leather Chesterfield tucked in the corner of the office. So, wildfire has made its way to the west coast. He nodded. From what Hardy described, it certainly seems that way, but we will only know for sure once we get the autopsy results. The body will be sent to San Diego Pac. Once there, Alice can tell the doctor what to look for and what tests to run. Why bother when you already know the results? The same thought had crossed Daniel's mind. If the others were anything to go by, the autopsy would find multiple organ failures, tumors rampant in the brain, and unidentified bacteria saturating the tissues and blood. To make matters worse, when they investigated the victim, Hardy would discover that the dead man had bottles of little-known herbal medication called wildfire stashed in his belongings. The toxicology screens would indicate trace amounts of the drug in the bloodstream, but nothing that would fell a full-grown werewolf in such a horrifying manner. Daniel leaned against his desk. For the same reason as the last 12 bodies, we need to know if this is just a coincidence or if there's something in common apart from being unaligned. Daniel understood that a portion of the community, either through choice or circumstance, chose to go it alone. As long as they kept a low profile and stayed out of trouble, he had no issue with their choice. It was when they turned rogue he took exception. The race's biggest risk of exposure was from this small sector, and the growing animosity between the pure and mixed-blood werewolves did not help. As far as he was concerned, all werewolves were equal, no matter their heritage. Any werewolf who thought differently was not welcome in his pack. Has Alice confirmed the link between wildfire and the deaths? The frustration with their lack of progress weighed heavily on Daniel's shoulders, adding to his ill temper. Werewolves, as a race, had no need for internal medicine. They did not get sick or suffer diseases in the same way as their human counterparts. Each pack had their own doctor, but they were trained to deal with physical injuries only. Understanding diseases and the workings of bacteria and pathogens was an alien concept. He was lucky that Dr. Alice Hayes, his pack's doctor, was a human doctor before she met her werewolf mate and made the choice to turn. She at least had some knowledge, even if it was decades out of date. Daniel headed to the wet bar and poured 2 glasses of single malt. He handed one to Simon. Has your team worked out how they're getting it? Simon took a sip and cleared his throat before he answered, We think they're ordering it online. Pardon? You know, the internet, the interwebby thingy. I bloody well know what online is, Daniel said. What have you found out? Turns out wildfire is freely available on sale on herbal health sites. Thousands of them. Well, more like hundreds. Anyway, none of the retailers manufacture the product, nor do they ship or stock the goods. Simon swung his legs off the couch. The entire delivery chain works through a third party that only transacts the internet. To make matters worse, the dietary supplement pills are FDA regulated, and they have no adverse effects on humans. We can't get wildfire removed from the online stores without attracting attention. Simon let out a frustrated groan. The problem is, we don't have the knowledge or the ability to deal with this. We tried to buy the stock out, but you can only order a single bottle at a time. Who knows how long it'll take us? We don't have the expertise to hack into those sites and bring them down. He raised a brow and snorted. Not to mention half of them are on porn sites. I had a hard time convincing Liza I was there for work. She even threatened to call my mother. The ramifications of allowing this to continue did not even bear thought. Not only could the drug be bought easily, but they needed to be prepared for the possibility wildfire would be given to an unsuspecting victim. He posed the question that had plagued him since hearing about the distribution method. Are we sure this drug is targeting werewolves and isn't just a side effect of the human weight loss product it's marketed as? You've seen the bottles. What do you think? Daniel had to admit, if the logo of a wolf paw print wasn't a giveaway, the Lupine brand on the bottle sealed it. Caught up on his own thoughts, he considered the possible consequences. If they could not stop the progression of the disease once contracted, they needed to stop it at its source. He ran a hand through his dark hair and let out a deep breath. He would need to convene an emergency meeting of the Alliance Council. If someone was targeting them, it would not be long before they were exposed. The last time this happened, it brought them to virtual extinction, an event that had taken over 3 centuries to recover from. He dismissed Simon and picked up the phone with a heavy heart. Simon passed through the doorway, but halted mid-step. We're out of our depth here. We have no idea about the digital world, and we're literally chasing shadows. He paused and tilted his head. You know who we need to call in, don't you? He could not believe this subject was being raised again. It's not going to happen. His voice came out as cold as ice. Over his dead body would he allow that to happen? Simon scurried out of the room, muttering under his breath, I wouldn't bet on it once the council gets involved. Alliance Council Meeting, Idaho. The venom in Daniel's tone was unmistakable as he brought his fist down on the table. No, absolutely not. The council had decided this particular meeting warranted a physical gathering rather than their usual video conference. Within 12 hours, they had convened on Brandsburg Pack land in Idaho, and within the first 30 minutes of the session, the conversation had turned into his worst nightmare. Morgan, one of the elder statesmen in the room and their hosts, pinched the bridge of his nose. Daniel, be reasonable. This is the only choice we have. We can't involve anyone else, and even if we could, Parker is still the best. Daniel crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back in his chair. Find someone else. There is no one else. You seem to forget Parker is not one of us. Members of the council whispered amongst themselves. Some around the large table viewed him as cold, distant, and unapproachable. His outburst probably shocked them. They were keeping their own counsel, waiting for the senior member to step in to loot the situation. Morgan rubbed the crown of his salt and pepper hair and took a deep breath. I beg to differ. Parker has been accepted by me, my family, my pack, and the majority around this table. Someone, who may I remind you, is protected by my pack. The old ways are gone, and this council is responsible for guiding and leading our people. All of them. From the other end of the table, a deep growl broke into the heated discussion. Head swiveled to Abraham. He leaned on his cane as he stood and made eye contact with each of the 12 alphas present. Enough! I have heard enough. Are you listening to yourselves? Abraham drew his white bushy eyebrows together, planted his gnarled hand on the table, and leaned forward. No one dared speak over the eldest member of the council. Thomas, his grandson, and the Texas Pack Alpha helped steady Abraham. He shooed the younger man away. I'm old, not disabled. Abraham's wrinkles etched further into his skin as he pierced Daniel with a penetrating stare. We are losing our people to this mess, and we have no idea how to stop this plague. The longer it goes on, the more risk we are to exposure and annihilation. If Parker can help us get through this, I don't care what chutzpah or prejudice you have, Daniel, you will get over it. You need to act now, or everything we ever knew, everything we ever worked to achieve, will disappear in the blink of an eye. An unfamiliar feeling of shame descended on Daniel while Abraham addressed the room. He needed to bury his personal issues and put his people first. Otherwise, Abraham was right. There would be no future for them. Despite his misgivings, his opinion of Parker would need to take a back seat. He leaned forward and drummed his fingers on the table. There was no choice. He had to concede to the council's resolution. I'll go along with your decision to seek Parker Johnson's help, but mark my words, I know from experience that we shouldn't trust this human. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Simon's self-satisfied smirk. Daniel growled and opened his telepathic link to his beta. For that, you're on patrol for the rest of the month. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard and would like to hear more, please click the like and subscribe button. Links to buy the book are down in the description, as are the links to my Twitter, Facebook, and Patreon. My audio reading book promotions are free for any published writers, so if you have a book you want me to read the first chapter from, just shoot me an email with your first chapter, book cover, links to purchase your book, and a brief description to ebonyclock@yahoo.com. See you next time on Ebony Clock Promotions.